Have you ever looked around your home and realized the quiet isn't just a moment, it's the whole soundtrack of your day? Not in a sad way necessarily, but in a way that makes you stop and think. So this is my life now. Just me, this house, and the ticking clock. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. And I don't mean that in the cheesy motivational poster way. I mean it because there are more of us than ever who find ourselves living alone in our later years, by choice, by change, or simply by the way life played out. No spouse, no kids around. Friends have moved, passed on, or drifted away. It happens. But what no one really tells you is this: it doesn't have to be a tragedy. In fact, it can become something quietly powerful. Living alone in old age isn't the end of your story. It's a whole new chapter. And in this video, I want to share with you 10 real lessons I've learned from walking that road. These aren't just things I read in a book or heard in a podcast. They're lived-in truths, some funny, some tough, but all honest. So if you've ever wondered whether you can really thrive in this phase of life, not just survive, pull up a spot wherever you are, and let's talk. You know what surprised me the most about living alone? It's not the silence, not the stillness, not even the loneliness that creeps in once in a while. It's how much pretending I used to do when I wasn't alone. That brings me to the first thing I've learned. When you live alone, the performance ends. You're no longer playing roles. You're not the parent juggling too many things, not the partner constantly compromising, not the friend who laughs at jokes that don't land just to keep the peace. You're just you. At first, that kind of honesty feels strange. You walk around your place and realize no one cares if you leave your dishes in the sink overnight. No one notices if you wear the same sweatshirt 2 days in a row or eat cereal for dinner. But something beautiful starts to happen when you stop performing. You begin to rediscover the things you actually like, not the things you were supposed to like, or used to like, or pretended to like for the sake of harmony. I remember one evening I cooked myself a nice steak dinner, just for me. Pulled out the good plate, the cloth napkin, even lit a candle like I was expecting company. Then halfway through eating, I paused and thought, why am I doing all this for just me? And then, just as quickly, another thought followed. Exactly. For me. And I smiled. Because I realized that I'm worth the good plate. I'm worth effort, even when no one's watching. That kind of honesty, living for yourself without needing permission, is freeing. You stop explaining why you like what you like. You talk to yourself out loud and don't feel silly about it. You laugh at your own jokes. You cry when you need to, without brushing it off. You become your own audience, your own cheerleader, your own safe place. And that leads to something even deeper. Because once the performance ends, you start to ask real questions. Like, if no one else is coming to fix this, can I? Which brings us to something else I had to learn the hard way. No one's coming. I don't mean that in a gloomy way. It's just the truth. No one is walking through the front door to check if you've eaten, or if the water heater is making that noise again, or if you remembered to take your meds. And when you first realize that, it can hit hard, like standing out in the cold without a coat. But here's where it turns. Once the shock wears off, you step up. You stop waiting to be saved and start saving yourself. Not in some grand, heroic way, but in small, steady ways that matter. I started by writing things down. Grocery lists, medication times, birthdays, even my own appointments. I kept a notebook on the counter like it was a lifeline, and in many ways, it was. That little spiral-bound book said, "I've got me." A man I know named Walter, he's 78, told me he came up with what he calls his 3-a-day rescue plan. Every morning he checks off 3 simple things: move, eat, connect, that's it. He goes for a walk, makes a real breakfast, and calls or messages someone. Doesn't have to be deep. It's about staying alive, in more than just the technical sense. It's about proving to yourself every day that you're still showing up. Living alone teaches you how to be your own safety net. Fixing a light bulb feels like a victory. Learning how to unclog a drain might as well be a Nobel Prize. These things matter, not because they're hard, but because they remind you that you can do hard things. When you stop depending on others for your day-to-day stability, you realize how capable you still are. You may not move as fast, your hands might be a little shakier, but that strength inside you, it's not gone. It was just waiting for you to listen. And when you start listening to yourself, something else becomes essential: routine. Let me tell you, when you live alone, especially later in life, time gets weird. Days bleed into each other. You go to bed not sure if it's Tuesday or Friday. You catch yourself wondering when you last opened the curtains or stepped outside. That's where routine becomes your anchor. Not a strict schedule with alarms and to-do lists, but a rhythm, something your body and mind can count on. For me, mornings are everything. I get up around the same time, stretch out my back, and open the windows. Even if it's cloudy, even if it's cold, it reminds me the world is still spinning, and I'm still part of it. One fellow I met, Ken, created what he jokingly called the lonely man's schedule. Every day at 10 a.m., he walks the block. Doesn't matter the weather. It's not about the walk, it's about the reason to get dressed, to move, to be seen. I respect that, because here's what I've learned. Without structure, your days can start to feel like you're floating in space. But give yourself even the smallest routine. Make tea at the same time, water your plants every Thursday, write in a journal before bed, and suddenly your life has shape again. I even started using a simple digital planner designed for seniors. Nothing fancy, but it works. It keeps me accountable to myself. Not because anyone's checking in, but because I want to feel like I'm still in the game. Routine gives your days a heartbeat. It says, yes, I'm here. Yes, I still matter. And trust me, that feeling is worth showing up for. You'd think, after a lifetime of navigating work, raising kids, managing relationships, and surviving the curveballs life throws at you, the later years might finally feel like coasting. But living alone teaches you something different. It shows you what you're made of, not when everything is easy, but when it's quiet, and you're the only one there to lean on. I learned that strength isn't loud. It's not always lifting something heavy or doing big, heroic things. Sometimes it's crawling across your kitchen floor at 2 a.m. because your leg gave out, pulling yourself up, and breathing through the pain, and then getting back to bed, sore but proud. That happened to me once, not the proudest moment, but it changed something in me. I realized I could count on myself, even when no one else was around. And that's the thing about living alone. It doesn't necessarily make you stronger, but it shows you the strength that was already there. You just didn't need it in quite the same way before. You were used to calling someone for help, leaning on a partner, a child, a neighbor. Now it's you. And the truth is, you're not helpless. You're just out of practice. That quiet confidence builds over time. Every challenge you face alone becomes a brick in the foundation. The more you handle, the less afraid you feel. And soon enough, you're not just surviving this phase of life, you're owning it. And as you grow stronger inside, you also begin to crave something simpler on the outside. Living alone has this way of shining a spotlight on what really matters. The clutter, the piles of stuff you once thought you needed, it starts to feel heavy. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. I used to keep everything, tools I never used, souvenirs from places I barely remembered visiting, even cords and batteries for devices I didn't even own anymore. At first, I told myself I was just being prepared, just in case. But one day I looked around and asked myself, who am I keeping this for? That question stuck. And the answer? Nobody. So, little by little, I started letting go. Not to be trendy or minimalist, just because I wanted to breathe again. Fewer things meant fewer decisions, less maintenance, more space, not just in my home, but in my head. There's a kind of peace that comes from walking into a room and knowing that everything in it has a reason to be there, that each item has a purpose or a memory worth holding on to. Everything else, gone. I heard from a retired teacher who said getting rid of half her belongings was like losing 40 pounds of stress. And she wasn't exaggerating. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just clear the space and see what's left behind. And here's what surprised me most. I didn't miss any of it. Not the extra mugs, not the 5 sets of towels, not the dusty boxes in the closet. What I had left was plenty. And for the first time in a long time, my home felt like it fit me. Not who I used to be. Me. Right now. But life isn't just about what you take out. It's also about what you let in. And for me, one of the best things I let into my life, believe it or not, was nature. I don't mean hiking mountains or planting a vegetable farm. I mean stepping outside and noticing the world around me, sitting under the morning sky, feeling the breeze through an open window, watching a squirrel dig for something it probably buried and forgot about. There's something incredibly healing about being in the presence of things that don't rush. Trees don't hurry. Birds don't make to-do lists. The sun rises whether you're ready for it or not, and there's comfort in that rhythm. Nature doesn't care how old you are, how fast you walk, or whether your knees make that creaky sound every time you stand up. It welcomes you anyway. I started taking short walks, just around the block at first. Some days I'd bring my coffee, some days I wouldn't. But I noticed how different I felt afterward. Calmer, less cluttered inside, more connected. There's something about watching the seasons change that reminds you that you're still part of something bigger. That even if life looks different now, it's still life, and you're still in it. Margaret, a woman I met through a community group, told me she started gardening after her husband passed. At first, it was just to stay busy. But she said the more she worked with the soil, the more she started to heal. Her words stuck with me. They don't talk back, she said, but those plants listen better than most people ever did. I understood exactly what she meant. You don't have to grow a garden to feel that healing. Just sit in the quiet and listen to the birds. Watch the clouds move. Feel the sun on your face. Nature has a way of meeting you where you are and gently pulling you back into the present. And speaking of pulling us into the present, let's talk about something many of us were skeptical about for far too long: technology. Now listen, I was one of those people who grumbled every time a new gadget came out. Why do I need a phone that talks back to me? I'd ask. Or, whatever happened to just writing things down? But one day, my niece brought over a little smart speaker, plugged it in, and said, "Just say, play Willie Nelson." I rolled my eyes, but I did it. And when the music filled the room, it felt like an old friend had walked in. I was hooked. Since then, I've slowly let tech into my life, not as a replacement for people, but as a helper. It reminds me to take my meds. It lights the hallway when I get up at night. I can video call friends, order groceries, even ask the weather without reaching for my glasses. It's not about becoming a tech wizard. It's about making life a little easier, a little more connected, and yes, a little more fun. There's a man I know who plays chess on his tablet every evening, with strangers, all over the world. He says it keeps his mind sharp and his spirit even sharper. Another woman joined a cooking group on Facebook and now shares recipes every week, complete with photos of her cat watching from the counter. It's sweet, it's silly, but it's real. That's what technology can be when we let it. Not cold and complicated, but a quiet sidekick. It won't replace the people we've lost, but it helps us stay engaged with the world that's still moving around us. And in a life that can feel smaller than it once was, Those small bridges matter. You may not have thought you'd ever ask a machine to play your favorite song or look up soup recipes on a screen, but here we are. And isn't it amazing that we can still surprise ourselves? Funny thing about growing older, you start to see connection differently. You realize it isn't always about being in the same room with someone or sharing a long dinner table full of laughter and noise. Sometimes connection is a smile from a stranger on your morning walk. Sometimes it's a short comment under a video or a familiar face at the pharmacy who remembers your name. Living alone in old age taught me that connection doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. I used to think I had to mourn the way things used to be. Big family holidays, neighborhood barbecues, spontaneous coffee visits. And sure, I still miss those. But I've learned not to sit in that grief too long. Instead, I ask, what kind of connection can I build today with what I have? For me, that started with the tiniest things. A wave to a neighbor taking out the trash. A thank you to the grocery store clerk who always asks how I'm doing. And yes, even leaving a comment or two on a video, just to let someone out there know, hey, I see you. You'd be surprised how those small moments grow. People remember you. They respond. Before you know it, you're part of a conversation again. Maybe not the kind with voices echoing through the house, but one that still makes you feel seen. A woman I know named Jean told me she doesn't have local friends anymore, but she's part of 3 online groups. One for cooking, one for crossword puzzles, and one for folks who live alone. She calls them her digital coffee table friends. They share recipes, stories, even birthdays. She said it may not be traditional, but it's real. And real is enough. Sometimes connection isn't even with people. Sometimes it's with the living world around you, feeding birds, caring for a pet, or even just talking to your plants. You begin to realize that connection is less about proximity and more about presence. Less about bodies in the room and more about energy you exchange. The world may feel smaller, but that doesn't mean your heart has to shrink with it. And in that space, where things are quieter, where your days are more your own, something else happens. You begin to hear a voice you may not have heard in a very long time, your own. Silence becomes less threatening and more revealing. In fact, it becomes something like a mirror. Not the kind that reflects your face, but the kind that reflects your thoughts, your memories, your truth. At first, it's uncomfortable. When you live alone, especially in the beginning, the quiet can be deafening. You turn on the radio or TV just to fill the room. Not because you're watching or listening, but because you're avoiding what happens in that stillness. But eventually, if you allow it, the silence stops being the enemy. It becomes a kind of trusted companion. You sit with it long enough and you begin to realize it's not hollow. It's full of things that were waiting to be heard. Old stories, unfinished thoughts, feelings you never had time to process when life was busy and loud. You start hearing things like, I'm proud of how far I've come. Or, it's okay to still miss someone even after all this time. And maybe most powerful of all, I'm still here. I still matter. There's a comfort that grows in that space. You stop trying to fill every moment with noise, and instead you start savoring it. The sound of the birds outside your window, the gentle hum of the fridge, the way the light moves across the wall as the day passes. These become small anchors that pull you back into your life. That silence, once feared, becomes a friend. And in that stillness, in that honest quiet, something beautiful starts to take root. Peace. But here's what I want to tell you. Peace doesn't just arrive one day like a package on your doorstep. It's not something you stumble into. It's something you build, piece by piece, choice by choice. I used to think peace would show up once I figured everything out, once the grief faded, once I felt completely okay, once life made sense again. But that day never came. What did come, though, were small moments. Moments where I made my bed, Not because anyone would see it, but because I wanted to feel order. Moments where I forgave myself for past regrets. Where I turned off the news because it made my chest feel tight. Where I let myself enjoy a quiet meal without reaching for a distraction. Those little choices built something stronger than comfort. They built peace. One woman once told me, "Peace didn't come to me. I earned it by showing up for myself every day." That line still sticks with me because it's true. You don't find peace, you create it. You carve it out with your habits, your boundaries, your kindness to yourself. It may not be loud, it may not be flashy. But one morning you wake up, look around your home and think, I made this. This life, this stillness, this safety, I built it. And that's a kind of pride that no one can take away from you. So if you're watching this and you're living alone, maybe by choice, maybe by circumstance, I want you to know something. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. You are not finished. You are still growing, still learning, still living. And that is something to be proud of. Living alone in old age doesn't mean your story is over. It means you finally have the pen in your hand. You get to decide what the next page looks like. Maybe it's slow, maybe it's quiet, maybe it's a little bit messy, but it's yours, and it's worth writing. So if any part of this touched something in you, go ahead and give the video a like. Not for me, but for you. For showing up, for staying strong, for choosing to keep going. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. Because we're not just telling stories here, we're building something together. A place for truth, strength, and a little bit of laughter, even on the tough days. You're not alone. Not really. You've still got time. You've still got choice. You've still got life. And I hope you live it honestly, gently, and on your own terms. Here's to you, and to the beautiful, quiet strength of a life well lived.